Hello children, so for storytelling day I've been looking around my house and I found some really old books, and I have found these books here. They are so funny because these are the books that I used to learn to read from when I was your age, when I was a little girl. These books are actually older than I am, can you believe that? So what I thought I'd do today is I would read you, eventually I'll read you both, but I'm going to read you this one today, which is The Elves and The Shoemakers. I can remember absolutely loving this book so much when I was a little girl. So I'm going to put it down here because the illustrations are so old, but that's part of the charm for me, because I just loved it. I remember just curling up and reading this book to myself. So come around and I'm going to share it with you. It's a really old book, so just be warned, okay? The Elves and the Shoemaker. Maybe your parents will know this book. So here we go. Oops-a-daisy. The Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time there lived a shoemaker and his wife. The man was a very good shoemaker and he worked hard, yet he and his wife were very poor, and as time went on they grew poorer and poorer. At last the day came when all the shoemaker had left was one piece of leather. It would only make one pair of shoes. And that evening, before he went to bed, the shoemaker cut out a pair of shoes from the leather. Then he left them on his workbench and all ready for him to sew the next morning. I was fascinated by this when I was little. As they were going upstairs to bed that night, the shoemaker spoke sadly to his wife. "I have used my last piece of leather," he said. "I have cut out one pair of shoes. Tomorrow I will sew them. When they are sold, I do not know what will become of us." The next morning the shoemaker got up early and went to his workshop, ready to make the shoes. On his bench, instead of the leather that he had cut out, he found a pair of shoes, already made. He was astonished and didn't know what to think, and I remember looking at these shoes thinking, oh, they're rather fancy. The shoemaker took the shoes in his hands and looked carefully at them. They were neatly made, with not one bad stitch in them. He showed the shoes to his wife, who said, "I have never seen a pair of shoes so well made. They are perfect." The shoemaker and his wife could not think who had sewn the shoes. The next morning, a lady came into the shop to buy a pair of shoes. Can you imagine walking around dressed like this today? The shoemaker showed her the pair he had found on his bench. She said, "I have never seen such well-made shoes." The lady tried on the shoes and they fitted her perfectly. She was so pleased with them that she paid the shoemaker twice the usual price. With the money, the shoemaker was able to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes. I always wanted a pair of shoes like this, children, with pointy bits like this. I just thought they were fantastic. That night, before he went to bed, he cut out 2 pairs of shoes. He left them on his workbench, all ready for him to sew in the morning. The next morning the shoemaker got up and went to his shop to make the shoes. But he had no need to. On his bench he found 2 pairs of shoes already made. He took the shoes in his hands and looked carefully at them. Once more he found that they were neatly made, with not one bad stitch in them. That morning a man came to the shop to buy some shoes. The shoemaker showed him the 2 pairs of shoes he had found on his bench. The man said, "I have never seen such well-made shoes." He was so pleased with them that he bought both pairs. He paid the shoemaker twice the usual price. Look at this, isn't it? I don't quite know how we'd cope with dressing like that today. With the money, the shoemaker was able to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. That night, before he went to bed, he cut the 4 pairs of shoes. He left them on his workbench, all ready for him to sew in the morning. If you can hear any whimpering, it's Rosie. The next morning, the shoemaker got up early and went to his shop to make the shoes. But he had no need to. On his bench he found 4 pairs of shoes, already made. He took the shoes in his hands and looked carefully at them. Once more he found that they were neatly made, with not one bad stitch in them. And so it went on. Every night the shoemaker cut out some shoes and left them on the workbench. Every morning he found the shoes all neatly made.
Many rich customers came to his shop to buy these perfect shoes. So in time, the shoemaker and his wife became rich. I don't know whether you can remember their first picture. I'm going to flutter back to it. Here we go, look, that's their picture at the beginning when they were poor. And now look at them, sitting by the fire with a nice black cat. Yet the shoemaker and his wife still had no idea who made these perfect shoes for them. And one evening, not long before Christmas, when the shoemaker had finished cutting out the shoes, he went to his wife. "We still don't know who sews these shoes for us," he said. "Shall we stay up tonight to see who it is that helps us?" His wife thought that this was a very good idea. She lit a candle and they went into the workshop. They hid themselves in a corner of the room behind some clothes which were hanging there. Then the shoemaker and his wife waited quietly and watched to see what would happen. I love this bit. I absolutely love this bit. I remember being so excited by this. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just as the clock struck 12, the door of the workshop opened quietly, and in came 2 tiny elves. They were dressed in old clothes and their feet were bare. They did not see the shoemaker and his wife, who were hiding in the corner watching them. Aren't they lovely? Oh, I just remember this is my favourite picture. The elves jumped onto the workbench and took up the shoes that were cut out. They began to stitch and sew and hammer. They worked so neatly and so quickly that the shoemaker could hardly believe his eyes. The elves did not stop for a moment until all the cut-out shoes were finished. Then they ran quickly away. The next morning at breakfast, the shoemaker asked his wife, "How can we thank these little elves who have made us so rich and so happy?" "I know what we can do," said his wife. "We can make them new clothes and shoes. Their own clothes are ragged and their feet are bare." During the evenings that followed, the shoemaker and his wife began to make new clothes for the elves. The shoemaker chose the softest leather he could find. He cut out 2 of the tiniest pairs of shoes you ever did see. Then he stitched the shoes so carefully as ever he could. The shoemaker's wife cut out 2 white shirts, 2 small green jackets, and 2 pairs of trousers to match. She sewed them up with tiny stitches. She made 2 little caps, each with a feather in it. She also knitted 2 pairs of wee white socks. Oh. By Christmas Eve, the tiny clothes and shoes were finished. The shoemaker cleared the leather and the tools from his workbench. He and his wife laid their presents on the bench instead of the usual work. Then they hid themselves, as they had done before, and waited to see what the elves would do. I love their hats. They look so happy in the next picture when it comes up. Just as the clock struck 12, the door opened quietly as before. The 2 elves came running in. They still wore their old clothes and their feet were blue with the cold. They jumped onto the bench, ready to get to work at once. But there was no leather on the bench, only tiny clothes. The elves were astonished at first and then they were delighted. In no time at all they were out of their old clothes. Then, talking and laughing, they dressed themselves in the beautiful new clothes, the green jacket and the trousers, the white shirt and the stockings, and the soft leather shoes and the little caps with the feathers that nodded as they laughed. In their delight, the little elves skipped and jumped over the chairs and benches. Then they joined hands and danced around as they sang, "Now we are boys so fine to see, we no longer cobblers be." At last they danced happily out of the door. The shoemaker and his wife never saw the little elves again, but from that time good luck was always with them. They were rich and happy for the rest of their lives. And that story, I would love that story when I was a little girl. I just love the idea of little elves coming in the night time, and I love the idea that they could get some clothes and knitted little socks. So that's one of my favourite stories. I've got this one here too, Rumpelstiltskin. That's another one of my favourites, but we'll do that one another day. So children, I hope you've enjoyed this book. It is incredibly old, but it was just so sweet and it's got such fun memories for me. And I hope that you have enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Bye!